The first is we need to put jobs at the center of economic policy, whilst we restructure towards higher value-added activities. And this requires new policy measures, including subsidies and incentives to encourage labor-intensive production. And secondly, we must become preoccupied with economic growth. And I was arguing that even as we stand here today, I believe strongly and firmly that the government growth narrative remains weak, if it exists. But probably we still have a commission about growth, because we seem to be throwing commissions to these problems these days. But I think it is a problem. I think the fact that we don't have a strong growth narrative. And we need to, I think the proposal is that we need a set of measures that actually quickly enable us, firstly, to face the fiscal crisis that we are in, and secondly, look at constraints around competitiveness and investment. And we need also measures to look at how to enhance productivity in our economy, etc., and make our firms more competitive. The third, I think, area is that we must expand new technological capacities and knowledge to quickly transition to a 21st century economy. And I think a lot has been said about this. And I'm saying this thing with a balance again, because I think there is a tendency to want to create jobs for skills that we don't have. And I think we must realize that the unemployment problem in South Africa is actually essentially a low skill or low skills, non-skilled, untrained problem, basically. I mean, and therefore, if you're thinking about dealing with the problem without writing off a big chunk of society, you would have to think about transitional measures, which we propose in the book, transitional measures about confronting that challenge. And as an economy, we're not competitive in the labor-intensive sector, as it were. And equally, we're not competitive in the high-end level and high-skill areas of sectors of the economy. The fourth point linked to our shift towards a higher productivity, we need to expand human capability. And again, fundamental to that is we must make our education work. And I know sometimes if you move around in certain circles, you would not realize that in South Africa, we still have a dual education system. You come from the villages, you come from township, you get a particular kind of education. And it takes you to a particular segment of the labor market. You come from, I said something, you have a different experience as schools, a different experience. And so I think you can't sustain that because poor education outcome reinforce inequality. And I mean, it's a no-brainer. There's huge research that shows that if you improve education outcomes, you're likely to actually begin to deal with inequality. The fifth point, of course, is a new set of trade-offs and measures required to be designed to accelerate economic inclusion. And generally, I think right through the book, Songezo, you will note that the issue about trade-off is fundamental. It is fundamental to most of the things that we have to do. If you are to drive growth, you cannot say that you're going to drive growth and then you have a government that thinks that it must continue to regulate or over-regulate. So if you're to drive growth, there must be a trade-off around regulation. In what I'm using that as an example, regulation, and so that you can drive growth. If you are to drive growth, there might be some other things. If you have to grow and expand labor participation, there might be other trade-offs that you need. And you can go on. So how do we get to those trade-offs? And I think that's the center of what I'm arguing, that the 1994 consensus was brought about by dialogue and engagement of different stakeholders in different sectors. And I think the crisis we face today as a country requires a similar broad contestation, of course. And all of these things, by the way, are anchored on developing a corrupt-free, high-performance state, which is fundamental. Because I think if your state capacity is weak, how can it maneuver different sectors of society in a particular direction. And last point I make is that the dynamics within the political parties, in particular the ruling party, is likely to be a deal breaker. And that's the dilemma probably we're facing. I keep on saying that I sometimes struggle in my mind to reconcile the agenda to unify, strengthen the African National Congress, and the agenda to strengthen national democracy and grow the economy. I sometimes struggle to find the two coming together. Probably if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said that that's aligned. But I struggle to find that now. So increasingly, I have this view that actually we might have be forced in, and those who are in leadership might actually be forced to think very hard about whether the priority is going to be the nation and nation building and state building and building the national economy and national democracy, or they continue to manage their differences internally within the party and try to solve their differences within the party.